In the last lecture, we asked where production begins. Now we ask a different question. Once product is being made, where should uncertainty sit? Because uncertainty does not disappear. It has to go somewhere, and very often it sits in inventory. Most people see inventory as stored products. What inventory really is? Is inventory boxes, units, stock in a warehouse? Inventory is not just stored product. Operationally, inventory is something deeper. Inventory is stored uncertainty. Every unit sitting somewhere represents a decision made before demand was fully known. Why hold inventory? Why do firms hold inventory? Because they cannot perfectly match supply and demand in real time. That's what we aim for, but that's not what companies can do. It's real to perfectly match supply and demand every time. So demand is uncertain. Remember, we don't know when stores are gonna be filled with like customers. We don't know when customers are gonna buy products. I don't know if the amount that we're planning to sell is really gonna sell. We don't know also about supply. Supply is uncertain. Will my suppliers send the products in the right time, or sometimes they get delayed and something happens? That's supplier uncertainty. Sometimes the supplier has some issue with their suppliers, and then that causes delays. Transportation also has uncertainty. Maybe there is high traffic, whether something that happened, a broken like a bridge, or something that is happening in the port that causes delays. That's transportation uncertainty. Production times are also uncertain. Why? Because again, imagine like the scheduling of a company and they're waiting for the raw material to come, and the raw material gets delayed. That's going to delay production. Or if some machine that breaks, then that causes delay in production. So the production time is also uncertain. So inventory absorbs that uncertainty. Without it, even fluctuation becomes a disruption. Okay, so what inventory does is we hold inventory because if the transportation is uncertain, we have enough products until the delay is gone and the shipment comes. If the supply cannot send because some reason, we hold inventory because then we wait for a supplier to send. That's what inventory absorbs uncertainty means. Okay. Um, Inventory protects the company, but then we have trade-off, and that's where the trade-off begins. More inventory means fewer stockouts, right? If you have more inventory in your store, customers show up to buy the product, they get the product, you don't have stockouts, right? Remember, stockout is when the products disappear, stockout appears. But if you have enough inventory, a lot of inventory, then you have fewer stockouts. So you have more protection, okay? More ability to survive uncertainty. So that's what more inventory is giving you, like is giving the company. This ability to navigate uncertainty. If demand changes, if there is a peak in demand, and lots of customers show up in the store, then the inventory can absorb that uncertainty, can absorb that peak in the demand, which means we have enough products for customers to buy. But the protection also has a downside, okay? It has a cost, and part of that cost is the capital tied up to the inventory. Why is the capital tied up? Because we paid for the raw material, we paid for suppliers to produce that product. That's the capital, the money tied up on those products. So more inventory means more capital tied up, and also more storage costs. You need space to put all those products, all that higher inventory. So storage cost rises with more inventory. Also, markdown risk increases because if you don't sell those products that you have in your store, maybe you need space for the new products that are about to come, and then you have to find space, or you put into more storage, or you make markdowns to try to sell them. So inventory is never a free protection. It is a trade-off. Okay. Of course, holding less inventory is not automatically better. Less inventory has a cost too. Less inventory means less financial exposure. You are not investing too much money. You have less products. You didn't have to pay for too much raw material. You didn't have to pay for too much production. So it's less financial exposure. And also less obsolescence risk. Obsolescence risk here means if you have a product that you design, you put for sale, and is not selling, the more the time passes, the more obsolescence, more obsolete it can be. Okay, so the longer like a product is sitting on like shelves waiting for customers, more likely it's going to be obsolete, because remember, like, there are new trends, culture is changing, people is changing, and then they might prefer other products. But if you have less inventory, you have less risk of having that inventory obsolete. But it also again has a downside. Less inventory means more um, lost sale risk, because you don't carry too much inventory. Maybe you sell out everything, and then you don't have inventory. You don't have products for customers when they show up. That's lost sales. So your lost sale risk goes up. Also, you have more service instability. You have more service instability because sometimes service here means you can serve your customers. You have the products to serve them. So if you have less inventory and you depend on replenishment, what's going to happen in practice is customers show up to the store. Sometimes you have the product, but sometimes you don't. And then you wait for the new shipment, and then customers come, and then you have the product, then it's gone because the inventory is not a big inventory. So that's what happens. That's what I mean by service instability. Here is the hidden link. Inventory does not begin only in the warehouse. It begins earlier. It begins in production planning. Because before products sit anywhere, someone has already decided how much to make and when to make it. So what is production planning? Okay? Production planning means deciding how much to make, how many units to make, when to make them, maybe a part of production in beginning of March, another part of production in end of March, and I don't know, a third part of the production, the last third, in end of April. I don't know. That's just different decisions about the timing, and also how much capacity is gonna be used. Like we're gonna like use all the capacity we have, or all the capacity suppliers have. But if we use all the capacity, maybe we're gonna have to put in inventory because we want to use all the capacity. Or maybe we decide, okay, we have capacity, but we're not gonna use all because I don't want to put in inventory. So that's the connection between production planning and inventory. So those decisions happen before demand is fully visible. Remember, demand is fully visible is you see in the store looking at customers coming and buying the products. That's demand fully visible. So production planning determines how much uncertainty the company absorbs in advance. So during the planning of how much to produce, you're also thinking about how much to put into inventory, and that inventory is how much my ability, my capacity to absorb uncertainty that we discussed before. There are two different planning logics. A firm can plan large early production runs. So let's make a lot very early. That may reduce unit cost because you're working with scale, but also increase exposure to excess inventory. If you decided to do a large production and early on, you don't know if that's what customers are going to buy when the production is ready. Remember what I mentioned some classes ago? I'm going to say it again. So imagine you're planning to produce today what's going to be in stores in 2 months. If you plan today, you don't know if that's what customers will want to buy in 2 months. You're giving a lot of time for them to change their minds, to see other products and maybe not buy yours. So that's the high inventory risk. Or then the firm can plan smaller staged production. Smaller staged production is producing less, maybe more often. It comes at a higher cost, raises cost because you're not taking advantage of large production of mass and scale and economies of scale like benefits. But it reduces commitment risk because you're not producing too much. Then you don't have too much inventory, you don't have too many products. If it doesn't sell, you are not selling fewer amount. So you are running risk for a fewer amount of products that are not going to sell. So production planning is really a trade-off between efficiency and adaptability. Efficiency, it means large early production. That's efficient. Adaptability means smaller staged production. The type of product matters here. Not all products should be planned the same way. For example, basics with stable demand can often tolerate earlier and large production commitments. Trend sensitive products, on the other hand, need more caution. We need smaller batches. We can commit later. Should be better to commit later and also have some flexibility. The more flexibility, the better. So inventory planning depends on what kind of product the company is trying to sell. We have one example here, which is Land's End. That's a strong example because it describes itself around timeless quality, trusted services. That's how they find themselves. And when they define themselves this way, that's what they're promising. That's very close to the reliability logic. That's the reason we are using them. So they are a good example of basics, and because of that, they can commit earlier during the cycle, the development cycle, the production cycle, and make larger commitments. Now we can move to location. Where can inventory sit? Inventory can sit in different places. Inventory can sit at suppliers. We can negotiate with suppliers, talk to them, and tell them to have inventory uh, for us. So we say, okay, we're going to buy from you, but we want you to have inventory at hand when we need it. Or inventory can sit in production. After producing, or during the production, we can have inventory of finished goods. We can have working inventory, parts of products that are not completely finished, but parts uh, ready, like for production. We can have fabric, textile, inventory of those raw material. That's inventory sitting in production. We can also have inventory in distribution centers. After producing all the products, we get like the production products ready and put in distribution centers before sending to the stores. So the distribution center would be an additional stage where we can hold the products before sending to the stores. Or close to the customer in retail, in the stores. Where it sits change the speed and the cost of service. So location is strategic. Okay, so now we're going to talk about where the inventory should be seated. Closer or more central? If inventory sits closer to customers, deliveries become faster, right? Like imagine we have stores and our inventory is like 50 miles away from our stores. So if stores are selling, we can quickly ship more products to the stores. But distribution cost usually rises. Okay, so we're going to have a higher distribution cost because then we we have to hold this inventory close to the stores, maybe in a distribution center, not in the stores, but close to that, and we have to ship them, and then we're going to have a higher cost of transportation, carrying this inventory in the distribution centers. If inventory is more centralized, then costs tend to be lower. What what's the difference between close to customers and more centralized? Close to customers means we have a bunch of stores in South Carolina and we have a distribution center in South Carolina. We also have stores in Florida, in Georgia, in Virginia. We have stores in all these states, and each state has a distribution center because we want the inventory to be close to all those stores in each one of these states. A more centralized inventory means we would have an inventory in Georgia serving Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. That would be a more centralized type of inventory. Okay, that's the difference. So if it's more centralized, one big distribution center in one of these states, and I'm gonna make a hypothetical case here for Georgia, then we don't have to carry multiple distribution centers close to the customers. We can have one more centralized, and then we economize because is is less like buildings that we have to pay. We don't have to carry multiple inventories at the same time. One only centralized distribution center can be responsible for multiple, for all those stores in all these states. However, because it's centralized, you're going to be slower in responding to changes or peaks in demand. Let's assume we have a centralized inventory in the state of Georgia, and then we have a peak in demand in Florida or a peak in demand in Virginia. Then we have first to get the information about the peak in demand. So stores selling more is selling more products. Product is hot in these stores, but then we're going to process these sales, send the information to management. Management has to issue an order for the distribution center at Georgia. Then the distribution center has to separate like the clothes, the boxes, and everything. Contact the truck or the like how we're going to distribute it, probably in trucks, and then have the truck like loaded, and then the truck drives to Florida. So you see that is lower in response, is much slower than being 50 miles away. By being in Georgia, you are like 200 miles, 300 miles away. So that's the slower response. So inventory location reflects service strategy, how you can serve the store. A key concept in inventory is the pooling logic. When we centralize inventory in a distribution center, we centralize an inventory for multiple stores. What we are doing, we are creating pooling. That's pooling inventory from all these stores and demand from all these stores. So demand from different locations is combined. So the firm often needs less total stock. Okay, that's called risk pooling. So I will try to explain to you very briefly. Imagine we have 10 stores in different states. And if we don't have a centralized inventory, imagine that each store carries 100 units of a given product. So 100 units in 10 stores, that's 1,000 units, right? If we have a centralized inventory serving these 10 stores, we can reduce the number of units each store carries, let's assume to 40 units. We can reduce to 40 units in 10 stores is 400 units, 600 units less than 1,000. And then we can have another 300 units in the distribution center. And when one of these stores are selling more, we can quickly serve that specific store. We know from statistics that it's very unlikely that all stores are going to sell the same amount at the same time. That's the reason that pooling makes sense, because they vary when they sell more. At one moment, one store is selling more, others are not. And then another moment, other stores selling more and the others are not. So that distribution of sales allows us to have less inventory in total, okay? Because then we can use this these probabilities to manage them centralized in serving these stores. That's the idea behind risk pooling, okay? So that's the reason we can carry lower total stock, because the stores don't need to carry full maximum amount of stock inventory. We can centralize put in a centralized distribution center. On the other hand, a distributed inventory puts products closer to the demand, so we are more responsive. That's the opposite of having a centralized inventory. That's having full inventory in the stores. By having the inventory in the stores, a lot of inventory in the stores, we can quickly respond to peaks in the demand. So locally, we are more responsive. We don't have to wait for a shipment coming from the distribution center if there is a suddenly peak in the demand. However, this is going to raise the total stock cost, right? So we're going to have more stock in the stores and a higher cost. This is one of the classic efficiency versus responsiveness trade-offs. Okay, here, if we want to be efficient, we should focus on centralized inventory. That's going to reduce the total stock and the cost. And if you want to be responsive, then we want a distributed inventory. Let the stores carry the inventory, because then we are more responsive to changes in demand, but a higher cost. And not all inventory is equally dangerous. We also have to understand this. Some inventory is riskier than others. Trend driven seasonal goods are risky. Again, they depend on the trend. If the trend goes away, if the trend fades, then probably customers don't want to buy anymore, and then we're going to stuck with the products, and then we have to do other alternatives such as markdowns or sell in marketplaces. Okay, short life cycle items are also risky, because the life cycle is very short. We have to sell them quickly. I mentioned this before. We can have an event, or event is a good example of short life cycle item. A specific event is happening. It's going to last 1 week or 2 weeks, a fair or something. And then if we don't sell at that time, the product loses value for customers. High margin products can create large financial exposure if they do not sell. So those that are high margin products, like luxury products, they can create financial exposure, right? Like, it's a lot of money to make them. It's craftsmanship, is very artisanal, like very careful, high quality control, high quality, like raw material. That's very expensive. That's cost more money, and it's supposed to be this way. So if they don't sell, that creates a problem, financial problem for the company, and that's what inventory is going to impact. Should should the company carry more or less, right? So inventory strategy must reflect the product's risk profile, not just quantity. There is one more layer here. Inventory is not only operational, it is also financial. I mentioned this and I'm going to say it again. It ties up working capital, all the money companies putting to make these products. It affects cash flow. Cash flow is you putting money to buy the raw materials, you paying suppliers. You have to do all this up front. You have to pay part of the raw material, at least part of the raw material, and part of suppliers up front before selling the product. and making money again. So you see that the cash flow is, I'm going to put money up front, produce all these products, distribute them to the stores, and then customers are going to buy and pay me back. So the flow of cash here can be affected if inventory is too big. If there is a big inventory, is a lot of money tied up, and then maybe you don't have money to pay your bills because you're waiting to sell these products in inventory. That's how it affects cash flow. It changes financial exposure, and that's why inventory policy is never just a storage decision. It's also a balance sheet decision because it affects finances. So here is the final idea. Inventory is a structural choice about uncertainty. How much uncertainty to absorb, when to absorb uncertainty, and where to absorb it. That's why inventory placement reveals strategic priorities. We have Hermes as an example here. Hermes is a useful inventory risk example because its model is built around control, artisanal production, and exclusivity rather than broad availability. So by not having it broadly available, it can manage those risk exposure because they make less products. They have limited supply, so less inventory, and that's for this reason they are less exposed. In the next lecture, we return to the core problem behind all these choices: prediction. Because once the system is built and inventory is placed, the next question is still the same. How well can companies actually forecast demand? So here's the final idea. Inventory is a structural choice about uncertainty. How much uncertainty to absorb, when to absorb it, and where to absorb it. That's why inventory placement reveals strategic priorities. In the next lecture, we return to the core problem behind all these choices: prediction. Because once the system is built and inventory is placed, the next question is still the same. How well can companies actually forecast demand?